My mom called me a failure at dinner until I showed her the $61,000 I'd quietly spent keeping their house from collapsing. I held my water glass so tightly that my fingers turned white, but I refused to let my mother see how deeply her words cut. Amanda, you'll never be as good as your sister. Her voice sliced through the air like a blade. The chandelier light above caught the edge of the crystal glass, scattering tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. But all I saw were the reflections of disappointment staring back at me. Silence crashed over our family dinner table. The same table that was now set to celebrate Sierra's big promotion. That's why we were all there, surrounding my parents' polished mahogany table on a Wednesday night. Sierra's promotion dinner. Not mine. I had rushed straight here after a 10-hour workday, barely managing to swap my rumpled office blouse for a clean one. My laptop bag was still in the car. I hadn't even had time to breathe before sitting down to smile and clap for Sierra again. Mom. Sierra started softly, her tone cautious. But Mom raised a hand, stopping her. It's just the truth, dear. Your sister chose stability over ambition. Nothing wrong with that, but we must acknowledge reality. Thanks for watching. Dad cleared his throat, staring down at his half-eaten salmon like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the world. Your mother's right, Amanda. Sierra's on track to become vice president before 30. Different paths, that's all. Different paths. I looked at Sierra, perfect Sierra in her crisp crimson dress, her hair still flawless even after a long day at work. Then I glanced at Mom, who wore the pearl necklace I'd bought her last Christmas. She had called it nice but not really my style back then. Yet she'd worn it to every single one of Sierra's events since. Something inside me cracked. 2 years of biting my tongue, 2 years of being the responsible one. 2 years of silence suddenly rose up my throat like a flood. I stood up. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened my purse and pulled out the folded paper I'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment for this. I've been paying your bills for 2 years, I said, placing the mortgage statement on the table. My voice didn't tremble, but my hands did. Including this house. Mom's eyes widened for a brief second before she regained her composure. She waved her hand dismissively. The same gesture she'd used my whole life whenever I tried to defend myself. That's what family does, she said. Sierra needs to focus on her career. My mind flashed back 6 years earlier, to Sierra's college graduation. Mom and Dad had handed her keys to a brand new red Mazda, complete with a giant white bow on the hood. Later that same day, they handed me a small gift bag, a coffee mug with my university logo on it. You're already established, Mom had said when she saw my face fall. Your sister needs our support. That was the pattern. Always, Sierra. Then came the first call 2 years ago. Dad's voice had sounded shaky. Temporary financial trouble, he said. Just one mortgage payment. Until things stabilize. But one payment became two. Two became 6. And now, 2 years later, here we were. I touched the corner of the mortgage statement on the table. 2 years of payments isn't temporary help anymore. Mom's tone sharpened. Family supports each other. Why are you being so selfish? I reached back into my bag and pulled out a neat accordion file full of receipts, bank statements, transfer confirmations, and canceled checks. 2 years of proof. 2 years of my financial drain. I've supported plenty, I said, voice steady now. But I'm not your ATM. Dad's face darkened. Your sister's at a critical point in her career. And I'm at a critical point in my patience, I snapped before I could stop myself. The table fell silent. Sierra looked between us, confusion creasing her perfect face. What's happening right now? No one answered her. Mom stared at me, eyes cold. Dad avoided my gaze completely, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be carved up there. And suddenly, I realized what I was risking: my family. The people who raised me, the sister I helped with homework, drove to dance recitals, sat with when she cried over breakups. But looking at their faces, I saw the truth for the first time. They didn't measure my worth in love, or time, or memories. They measured it in dollars. In what I could give while staying conveniently invisible in the background. I'll be taking a break from family dinners, I said, gathering my purse and my dignity. Mom's face hardened. You'll regret this, Amanda. Family is all we have in this world. I paused at the doorway. Then I guess I have nothing. A week passed after that dinner. No calls. No texts. Just silence except for the occasional message from Sierra checking in with awkward small talk. Then on Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Can you help me organize my tax paperwork? Mom asked, her tone sugary sweet. Since you're so good with numbers. I should have said no. But old habits die hard. So that Saturday, I found myself sitting in her home office, surrounded by chaotic stacks of papers. And that's when I saw it. My name. Not on my own documents, but on Sierra's student loan statement. I froze. Payment. $19,400. Transfer confirmation. My account number. My heart dropped into my stomach. I flipped through more papers, car payments, credit card bills, all paid from my account. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't emergency payments. They weren't temporary help. This was planned, systematic, expected. I heard footsteps behind me. Did you find the mortgage interest forms? Mom asked casually, her pearl necklace gleaming in the afternoon light. Then she noticed the papers in my hands. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt, annoyance. Annoyance at being caught. What is this? My voice came out quiet, almost distant. Dad appeared behind her, adjusting his reading glasses. Sierra hovered in the hallway, thumbs moving across her phone screen. Amanda, don't make a scene, Mom said, stepping into the office. Dad followed, both of them looming over me as I sat frozen in the chair. You used my money to pay Sierra's student loans? I said, tapping the page. $19,400? Mom waved her hand like she always did. You were helping the family. Sierra's loans were the most pressing. And her car payments. This Ron too had be a lease, informant said. Sempent for Mortan. I held up another statement. $3,600 last year alone? Dad nodded, as if it made perfect sense. Transportation is essential for her position. She meets clients. And the credit cards? I fanned out more papers. $9,200. Restaurants. Designer clothes. Mom didn't even blink. Professional appearance matters in marketing. I turned to Sierra, who finally put her phone down. She shrugged. I didn't ask for any of this. Mom said you were happy to help. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the air was collapsing around me. For 2 years, I thought I was helping my parents through a hardship, but in reality I was funding Sierra's lifestyle. Do you have any idea what this is doing to my financial future? I asked, voice trembling. Mom blinked, looking genuinely confused. Family supports family, Amanda. We've always taught you that. Then her eyes brightened. Speaking of which, Sierra's wedding is coming up. Of course you'll help with that too. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I stared down at the papers, flipping to the final page where I'd calculated everything. $61,000. $61,000. 2 years of mortgage payments, student loans, car payments, and credit cards. All of it gone. All while being called a failure. That number haunted me. $61,000. Money that had quietly disappeared into other people's lives, while I kept telling myself it was temporary. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the ledger open across my knees. Every transfer, every check, every note I'd made was there. 2 years of evidence, my entire financial lifeline turned into proof of how easily love can be mistaken for obligation. By the next morning, I couldn't sit still. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. So, I drove across town to meet Diane, my coworker, my one constant voice of reason. We sat in a quiet cafe, half empty on a Tuesday afternoon. My coffee went cold as Diane flipped through the pages of my ledger. Her brow furrowed with every turn. This isn't normal family support, Amanda, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. She slid the ledger back to me. This is exploitation. The word landed like a slap. Exploitation, not help, not love, not family duty. It was a deliberate taking. As I drove home that evening, I kept repeating the word in my head until it lost its meaning. Exploitation. I wanted to scream. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running the numbers over and over again in my mind. Should I cut them off entirely and let them face reality? Or should I try to ease them into it, reduce payments slowly, soften the blow? Either way, something inside me had changed. The illusion had broken. Wednesday morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 5 missed calls from my cousin. 3 from Mom. 1 from Dad. They were organizing a family emergency meeting. I stared at the screen and turned the phone face down. I wasn't going. From the cubicle beside me, Diane peeked over. You avoiding someone? My mother. I sighed. She's planning a family reunion and apparently I'm the one expected to fund it. Diane's eyebrows shot up. The nerve, after everything else they've taken? I nodded and opened my email. 3 messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, each asking for help, all written in that same guilt-laced tone. The family needs you, Amanda. You've always been the responsible one. Responsible. Reliable. The safe daughter. Diane leaned closer. Have you checked social media today? I frowned. Why? She turned her monitor toward me. Sierra's face filled the screen, a photo from her engagement announcement. The caption read, planning the celebration of the century for my beautiful daughter. Blessed number family. And there, in the comments section, someone had written, Amanda will help make it perfect. My stomach twisted. I didn't even know she was engaged. That night, I sat curled on my couch, scrolling through Facebook. My thumb froze when I saw a photo posted 5 weeks ago, Mom, Dad, and Sierra, in front of the Las Vegas sign, holding cocktails, smiling like everything was perfect. The timestamp was from the same weekend I'd sent them money for an emergency property tax payment. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. They'd gone to Vegas. With my money. The realization burned hotter than anger. It was humiliation. I'd spent years working overtime, skipping vacations, denying myself little luxuries, all to help a family that was living better than I was. After that night, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. counting numbers in my head. How much I'd given. How much they'd asked. How little I had left. At work, I'd catch myself zoning out, thinking about the second notice on my own student loan. Meanwhile, Sierra's loans were paid off with my money. "You look exhausted," my boss said one Thursday morning when I missed a deadline for the first time in 3 years. "I'm fine," I lied. But my reflection told the truth: dark circles, tense jaw, hollow eyes. That weekend, I started keeping a journal. Not a diary, a record. Every phone call, every request, every guilt trip. The small leather notebook became my armor. I wrote everything: the pattern of manipulation, the emotional traps, the subtle shifts in tone when I hesitated to help. Page by page, it became undeniable. My family didn't just rely on me, they used me. Then one Tuesday evening, as I was leaving the office, a voice called out behind me, "Amanda." I turned to see Uncle Frank standing near the elevators, hands in his coat pockets, his weathered face kind but concerned. "Uncle Frank?" I blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he said simply. "You've missed the last few family gatherings." "That's not like you." I looked down, unsure how to explain. He studied me quietly for a moment. "You know," he said, his voice gentle, "I always thought you were the backbone of this family. But now I'm starting to wonder if they've been taking advantage of that strength." His words hit harder than I expected. My eyes stung, but I blinked back the tears. Uncle Frank squeezed my shoulder. "Don't let them drain you dry, kiddo. You deserve a life too." That Saturday, I found myself standing in my parents' kitchen again, the same house I'd helped pay for. Sierra sat at the counter, flipping through bridal magazines while Mom circled venue options in red pen. "The country club deposit is due next week," Mom said, not even looking up. "Sierra deserves the perfect celebration. You can cover the deposit." It wasn't a question. It was an order. Something in me broke cleanly, not a crack this time, but a complete snap. "I'm not paying another cent," I said, my voice calm. The room went still. Sierra looked up, eyes wide. Mom froze, pen suspended mid-air. "Don't be ridiculous," she said finally. But there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm serious," I continued, my tone flat, almost eerily steady. "I've paid the mortgage. I've paid Sierra's loans, the credit cards, the car payments. I'm done." He was a Gretjoy. "Like the make a roll buddy." Mom opened her mouth, but I cut her off before the guilt could start. "For years, I've been financing my own mistreatment," I said quietly. "That ends today." For once, she had no words. The next evening, I sat at Diane's dining table surrounded by spreadsheets and receipts. She pressed buttons on her calculator and then looked up at me. "Without supporting them, you could pay off your student loans in 3 years, instead of 15. I stared at the number. 3 years, freedom. That night, my phone buzzed. Uncle Frank again. "I spoke with your mother," he said bluntly. "I know," I sighed. "She's not happy." "Good," he said. "Sometimes family needs to learn hard lessons." "I'm proud of you, Amanda. Proud of me." I wasn't sure anyone in my family had ever said that before. When we hung up, I opened my laptop and searched for jobs outside of Austin. Seattle caught my eye: listings for software architect positions with salaries higher than I'd ever imagined. A new start. A real one. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a life built around me, my dreams, my needs, my peace. The next morning, I went to the bank and asked for printouts of every transaction from the past 2 years. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the sheer volume, but complied. Back home, I spent hours organizing them chronologically, highlighting every payment tied to my parents. Then, tucked among Dad's files, I found something I wasn't supposed to see: a bank statement for an account I didn't know existed. The balance was enough to cover months of mortgage payments. They'd been hiding money. I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling in my hands. They'd let me bleed my savings dry while keeping their own secret stash. My phone rang again. "Mom, we're having an emergency family responsibility meeting tomorrow," she said briskly. "The mortgage payment didn't arrive." "I know," I said calmly. "I told you I'm done paying. Instead of work and see then all the work." "This isn't a game, Amanda," she snapped. "Be here at 6. I hung up and looked at the papers spread across my table, the evidence of everything they'd taken. For the first time, I held all the cards. "I'll be there," I whispered. "With receipts." Tuesday evening, the day of the so-called family responsibility meeting. I parked 2 houses down from my parents' place. The same colonial-style home I'd kept afloat for 2 years. The weight of the thick black binder on the passenger seat felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Inside that binder was everything: the receipts, the statements, the proof. 2 years of my life, reduced to organized evidence. Uncle Frank's voice echoed in my mind. Don't let them control the narrative. I took a deep breath, straightened my blazer, and walked toward the house. When I opened the door, that familiar scent of lemon furniture polish hit me. The same polished mask of a home, bright, clean, deceptively perfect. Mom and Dad were already in the dining room, sitting at opposite ends of the table like monarchs awaiting their subject. Sierra sat between them, scrolling through her phone, her face lit by its glow. Mom looked up, surprised. "You're early." "I wanted to make sure we had enough time," I said. I placed the binder in the center of the table. The soft thud it made drew everyone's eyes. "Time for what exactly?" Dad asked, his voice cautious. "Time to go through everything I've paid for over the past 2 years," I said. My tone wasn't angry, it was measured, businesslike. "Let's start with the mortgage." I opened the binder to the first tab, labeled neatly in blue ink. Mortgage. Inside were bank statements, transfer confirmations, each one highlighted and dated. 24 payments, I said, tapping the page. $1,200 each. That's $28,800. Mom's eyebrows shot up. That can't possibly be right. I flipped to the next section. Student loans, Sierra. $19,400, I said. Dad's face lost color. His fingers drummed against the polished mahogany, the same rhythm he used when he was nervous. Next page. Car payments. Sierra's Mazda 3,600. And finally, credit cards. 9,200. Mostly for clothing, restaurants, and work trips. Sierra's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. "That's more than I make in 3 months," she whispered. I flipped to the summary page, the total highlighted in yellow. Grand total $61,000. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're exaggerating. Half of those payments were gifts. You offered to help. I have proof for every dollar," I said, pulling a manila folder from my bag, copies of every check and every transfer. I dropped it next to the binder. "Would you like to go through them one by one?" Dad muttered. "This is ridiculous." But he didn't look at me. Sierra reached for the folder, flipping through the papers with trembling fingers. The sound of each page turning filled the silence. Her usual confidence vanished. "I had no idea," she said quietly. "Mom told me you were happy to help. That you had extra money." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Extra money? I've been putting off dental work because I couldn't afford it. I'm still paying off my own student loans." Sierra looked at me, guilt flooding her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I hesitated. Should I tell her the truth that our parents made me promise to stay quiet so she wouldn't worry? That they'd sworn me to secrecy while they spent my salary like a joint account? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Mom stood quickly. "We're in the middle of something," she said sharply. "That would be Uncle Frank," I replied. "I asked him to join us." Dad's head jerked up. "Frank? Why would you?" "Because I'm done having this conversation in private. And the present the Clives, they haven't faced. And the present the Praj." Uncle Frank's booming voice came from the entryway. "Hello everyone, hope I'm not late." Mom's jaw tightened as he stepped into the room and took a seat beside me. He nodded toward the binder. "I see Amanda's showing you the numbers. You knew about this?" Mom's voice was sharp, laced with betrayal. "I suspected," Frank said evenly. "Family helps each other in emergencies, not as a permanent arrangement. What you've been doing to Amanda isn't right, Elaine." Silence fell. The kind that made every breath feel too loud. Mom's face froze, her well-crafted composure beginning to crack. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Sierra spoke softly. "Jenna asked me yesterday why Amanda never comes to family events anymore." Her voice shook a little. "She said it seemed like something was wrong." Mom waved her hand, her tone brittle. "Your friends don't understand our family dynamics." Uncle Frank's voice cut through the room. "The Hendersons called me last week. They wanted to know if it was true that you were behind on your mortgage while still spending on luxury items." Dad flinched. "That's none of their business." The air in the room shifted. Every secret, every manipulation, every lie that had been buried under family loyalty, was now laid bare under the harsh light of truth. Then Sierra's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. "It's from the mortgage company," she said quietly. "They're sending a late notice." For a moment, no one spoke. I watched Dad's shoulders slump, watched Mom's expression collapse under the weight of her own choices. The perfect image they had spent years maintaining gone. The facade cracked wide open, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix it. 2 days later, I sat across from my parents at the same kitchen table where everything had begun. The light streamed through the window, catching the dust motes floating between us. The silence was different now. It wasn't powerful. It was small. Dad smiled, but it was tight, forced. He slid a piece of paper toward me. Amanda, we've been thinking. Mom nodded. We understand your concerns about the financial arrangements. Family should acknowledge each other's contributions. We haven't done that enough with you. The script sounded rehearsed. I watched their performance like an outsider now, the way Dad's fingers tapped the table. How Mom kept glancing at the stack of overdue bills half hidden under a cookbook. We have a compromise, she continued. If you resume the mortgage payments, we'll make sure everyone knows how much you help. Sierra too. Dad leaned forward. Think about what you're risking, Amanda. Family relationships can't always be repaired once they break. Their words hung between us like bait. 2 months ago, I might have folded. 2 weeks ago, I might have negotiated. But today, I simply opened my laptop. I've accepted a new position, I said. I turned the screen toward them. Software architect at Meridian Tech in Seattle. I start next month. The color drained from Mom's face. Seattle? That's across the country. The salary is $135,000. I said, scrolling down my spreadsheet. That's $33,000 more than I make now. And without supporting this household. I highlighted a row on my budget. I'll save over $3,000 a month. It's not there. They're also cont again. Mom's lips pressed together. You can't just leave. I've been paying for the privilege of being disrespected. I said quietly. That arrangement is over. Dad reached for my hand. Amanda, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I said. For the first time in years. My phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Frank. Everyone's here. Ready when you are. I have to go. I said, closing my laptop. Mom frowned. Go? Where? Sierra's dinner, I said, standing up. It starts in 30 minutes. Dad blinked. Dinner? You'll see. I said, and walked out the door. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses when I arrived. Uncle Frank had reserved a private room near the back. Sierra sat at the head of the table, glowing in a cream-colored dress, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in months. My parents followed close behind me, still confused. Still pretending everything was fine. What is this about? Mom whispered harshly. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked straight to Sierra. She looked up, her smile faltering when she saw my face. Amanda. What's going on? I placed a wrapped box in front of her, silver paper, tied with a ribbon. The light from the chandelier made it shimmer. I wanted to show you something, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. To all of you. The room fell silent. Open it. Sierra hesitated, then peeled away the paper. Inside was a leather-bound portfolio filled with copies of every financial record, every receipt, every transfer. Here's my gift to you, I said softly. The truth about who's been supporting you. Sierra flipped through the pages. The color drained from her face. It's all there, I continued quietly. $61,000. Over 2 years. She looked up at me, eyes wide and glassy. Then she turned toward our parents, who stood frozen near the doorway. How could you? She whispered. Mom took a step forward. Sierra. This isn't the place. No. Sierra snapped, her voice trembling but strong. We need to talk about this right here, right now. Uncle Frank stood. Your sister has been carrying this family while being treated like she's less successful than you. The room erupted in murmurs. Aunt Patricia gasped. Martha, is this true? Mom's face went pale. Dad stared at the floor. Sierra pushed back her chair and walked over to me. The portfolio clutched tightly to her chest. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I never knew you carried so much for me. I'm sorry. We have those not in Provent. We have not towns. We have not in town. A single tear slid down her cheek. From now on, she said softly, live for yourself. And for the first time, I believed I finally could. After that dinner, everything shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly. Like the moment after an earthquake when the ground stills. But nothing looks quite the same. In the days that followed, word spread through the family faster than I could have imagined. The truth always does. Aunt Patricia called, not to scold, but to whisper. I had no idea, sweetheart. Cousin Ryan texted, proud of you for standing up for yourself. Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. But from my parents? Nothing. Not a word. Not a call. Not even a guilt-laced text. Just silence, the kind that tells you everything you need to know. 2 weeks later, Uncle Frank stopped by my apartment. He walked in holding a grocery bag and that familiar kind smile that somehow made me feel 12 again. "I brought dinner," he said, placing the bag on my counter. "I figured you could use a break from takeout." I smiled weakly. "You're not wrong." We ate spaghetti straight from the pan, sitting at my small kitchen table, the one thing in my apartment that didn't feel temporary. He looked at me over his glass of wine. "You know they're struggling, right?" I nodded. "Yeah. I heard they're behind on the mortgage again. They're considering selling the house," he said quietly. I stirred my pasta, unsure what to say. Part of me felt guilty, a small, loyal part that still wanted to rescue them. But another part of me, the part that had finally learned how to breathe on her own, felt relief. "I don't know if I can feel sorry for people who created their own mess," I said. "That's not cruelty, Amanda," Uncle Frank replied. "That's boundaries." I started packing that same weekend. Seattle was only 3 weeks away now. I boxed up my life piece by piece, my few framed photos, my journals, the laptop that had become both my job and my escape. Then, while wrapping a set of glasses in newspaper, I found an old photo album tucked behind a stack of files. The cover was worn, corners frayed, but I knew it immediately. It was our family album: vacations, holidays, birthdays. I opened it slowly. There we were, smiling faces frozen in time. Me and Sierra building sandcastles, Dad flipping burgers, Mom laughing with sunglasses perched on her head. We looked happy. We looked like strangers. I closed the album gently and placed it into a box labeled undecided. A few days later, I got a message from my boss. "Before you move, come by HR tomorrow. Something to discuss." My stomach dropped, that neutral corporate phrasing that could mean anything from congratulations to catastrophe. The next morning, I walked into the HR office, trying to look composed. My manager, Carla, smiled when she saw me. "Relax," she said. "Good news." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. "You're being promoted officially," she continued. "Team lead. It'll help with your transition to Seattle." For a second, I couldn't speak. After years of quietly doing more than my share, after watching others take credit, the acknowledgement felt surreal. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice thick. Carla smiled. "You've earned it." As I left the office, I realized something simple and profound. I had stopped waiting for validation from people who would never give it. That night, I celebrated with Diane over video call. "Seattle, Amanda," she teased, raising a glass of wine. "The glow up is real." I laughed. "It feels weird. Good, but weird. Like I'm finally catching up with myself." "Freedom does that," she said. "You're building something new." I hesitated before replying. "Do you ever worry that walking away from family makes you cold?" Diane leaned closer to the camera. "No. It makes you conscious. Don't confuse the two." Her words stayed with me. Moving day came fast. Uncle Frank insisted on helping me load boxes into the van. As we carried the last one down the steps, he said quietly, "You know, your mom called me yesterday." I froze. "What did she say?" "She's trying to understand why you're really leaving." I let out a humorless laugh. "Really?" she said. "Amanda's being dramatic." Of course she did. Uncle Frank sighed. "I told her she's mistaking independence for rebellion. She didn't like that. There not a few have this wongets like the lettering by now." We both laughed softly. Then his expression softened. "Don't look back, kiddo. You're doing the right thing." I hugged him tightly. "Thank you for everything." He smiled. "Hey, I didn't do much. You believed me," I said. "That's more than anyone else ever did." The drive to Seattle took 2 days. 2 days of open road, gas stations, and late-night diners where no one knew my name. Somewhere between Texas and Oregon, I realized how light I felt. For the first time in my adult life, my bank account wasn't being drained by someone else's emergencies. Every mile between me and that house felt like healing. By the time I reached the city limits, the skyline rising against the gray clouds, I felt like I'd finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. 6 months later, the morning sunlight streamed through my new apartment's windows, warm, gold, soft. The air smelled like coffee and possibility. I checked my student loan app on my phone. Balance reduced $2,400 this month. No mortgage payments from my parents. No credit card bailouts for Sierra. Just me, my work, and my future. The peace of that realization was better than any luxury I'd ever paid for. That afternoon my laptop chimed with an incoming video call. "Diane. Look at you," she said, grinning. "Seattle suits you." I smiled. "You think?" "Absolutely. You seem lighter, happier." "I closed 2 major projects this quarter," I said. "And the client satisfaction scores came in highest in the company." Her eyebrows lifted. And no one taking credit for your work this time? I laughed. A real laugh that started deep in my chest. Nope. I finally get to own what I do. She raised her mug. To boundaries and better bosses. I clinked my coffee cup against the screen. I'll drink to that. This president's, and they one of the right of Ozenkraft. That evening, my company hosted a dinner at a downtown restaurant. As I got ready, I slipped into a sage green dress and clasped a simple gold necklace around my neck. For a moment, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Shoulders back. Chin lifted. Eyes clear. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who'd once sat in that dining room holding a mortgage statement with trembling hands. When I walked into the banquet room, the hum of conversation greeted me. My department head waved me over. There she is, she announced. Amanda's client satisfaction scores were the highest in the company this quarter. Applause filled the room. My cheeks warmed. But I didn't deflect or diminish the praise like I used to. Thank you, I said simply. I'm proud of what we've built. And I meant it. Later that night, a woman at my table asked casually, "So, what about your family? They must be proud." For a second, my stomach tightened, but only out of habit. "My parents and I are taking some space," I said calmly, butter knife steady in my hand. "My sister and I are finding our way back to honesty." The woman nodded. "Sometimes family's complicated." I smiled softly. "And sometimes, it's exactly what it looks like." They're watching, so now it's spines of a redder. That weekend, Uncle Frank and Diane came to visit Seattle. We ordered takeout and sat in my living room, surrounded by laughter and half-empty wine glasses. Uncle Frank raised his glass of Pinot Noir. "To Amanda," he said. "Who taught me it's never too late to choose your real family," Diane added, smiling. "To building the family you choose, not just the one you're born into." We clinked glasses. For the first time in years, the word family didn't feel heavy. It felt right. A few days later I got an email. The sender's name made my breath hitch. Sierra. "I took over Mom and Dad's mortgage payments last month," she wrote. "They weren't happy about it. Dad even suggested I ask you to help until I get established. I told him I've been established for years, just never financially independent. That's changing now." I kept reading, her words slow and unsteady, but honest. "It's harder than I expected," she admitted. "But also more satisfying. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." The last paragraph stopped me. "Mom and Dad want to visit you." I told them that's your decision. "But I'd like to visit sometime, if you're open to it." Just me. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing my reply. "Not ready for Mom and Dad yet. But I'd love to show you Seattle in the spring." I hit send and sat back. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about excusing what they did. Maybe it was about freeing myself from the weight of it. That night, I stood by my window, watching the city lights shimmer against the dark water. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me I'd done enough. I already knew I had. Seattle had begun to thaw. The air that once bit like glass now carried the smell of rain and fresh pine. The streets wet and glimmering under soft gray skies. I had lived here for 6 months. But this morning, light. This quiet rhythm of independence still felt new. I poured myself coffee. The same ritual every day. Grind, pour, breathe. My life had become an odd mix of spreadsheets and stillness, deadlines and self-care. It was strange how peace could feel almost suspicious after so many years of chaos. Then my phone buzzed. New email. Sierra Reed. I hesitated before opening it. The last time she'd written, it had been tentative, an olive branch sent through the internet. "Hey, Amanda. I'm in over my head planning the wedding. But not in the old way. I'm paying for things myself now. It feels good. Weird. But good. It is foreign." I smiled as I reread her earlier message. This new one was longer. Asterisk, Mom and Dad listed the house. They didn't tell anyone until the for sale sign went up. It's hitting them hard, but I think it's fair. I've been visiting them weekly, mostly to help pack. They're quieter now. Not sorry in words, but different in posture. You know? Like they finally realized something broke. Asterisk. I stared at that line for a long time. Different in posture. That was my sister's way of saying regret without saying it. "They asked about you," she added. "I told them you're thriving." Dad said, "She always was. We just didn't want to see it." I think that was the closest he'll get to an apology. When if their white bat or whale. That night, I walked to the waterfront, letting the cold air sting my cheeks. The city hummed around me, the ferries, the street performers, the smell of salt and espresso. When I first moved here, Seattle had felt impossibly big. Now, it felt like mine. I stood there for a while, thinking about Sierra, about how she was finally paying her own bills, finally standing on her own 2 feet. And for the first time, the idea of forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like release. A week later, my phone rang while I was at work. The caller ID. Mom. My pulse spiked. For 30 seconds, I just stared at the screen. Then, almost without realizing, I pressed decline. The voicemail came through an hour later. Her voice sounded older, softer, almost fragile. "Hi Amanda. It's Mom. I know you're busy but we'd like to see you before we move. The house isn't the same without you. I'm not asking for money, sweetheart. Just time. Just dinner." I replayed the message twice. No manipulation. No guilt. Just a mother, stripped of her defenses. Still, I couldn't bring myself to answer. Not yet. That weekend, Diane and I met for brunch near Pike Place Market. "You gonna call her?" she asked between sips of her latte. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to. Another part still remembers every time she called me selfish for saying no. Diane leaned back. "You can visit without volunteering. You can show up without surrendering." Her words stuck. Show up without surrendering. Maybe I could. A few days later, Sierra texted. "They're hosting one last dinner before the move. No pressure. But they asked me to invite you. Uncle Frank will be there too." I read it 3 times. The idea of walking back into that house made my stomach tighten, but something deeper, quieter, nudged me forward. Closure. That voice whispered. Not reconciliation. Closure. The return. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Boxes lined the hallway. The walls that once displayed endless framed photos were bare now, leaving pale rectangles of untouched paint. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in. She froze when she saw me, her hands stilling over a stack of plates. "Amanda," she said softly. "You came." I did. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she surprised me. She stepped forward and pulled me into a brief, trembling hug. "You look good," she said. "So do you." I lied gently. Her face was thinner, eyes tired. Dad emerged from the living room, older somehow. "Amanda," he said, clearing his throat. "Glad you're here." I nodded. "Me too." Uncle Frank sat at the table, smiling quietly, a steady anchor in a room still learning how to balance itself. Dinner was awkward. Conversation fluttered around safe topics: the weather, Sierra's new marketing campaign, my job. The old tension still lingered, invisible but heavy. Halfway through the meal, Mom put down her fork. "I know you think we used you," she said carefully. "And you're right. We did. We thought it was love. It wasn't. It was convenience." The words hit like a gust of wind, unexpected, knocking the air from my chest. Dad nodded. "We leaned on you because you never complained. That's no excuse. We owe you an apology and a thank you." Silence followed. Real, raw silence. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. Instead, I looked at them and said simply, "Thank you for saying that." No dramatics, no speeches, just acknowledgement. After dinner, Mom walked me to the door. "I don't expect you to forget, Amanda," she said. "But maybe one day, you'll come by just because." "Maybe," I said. She smiled faintly. "Sierra told me you like hiking now. Your dad and I were laughing about that. You always hated the outdoors as a kid." I smiled too. "I guess I like things that make me breathe these days." He one of the Claston in Dine. Settles not pair. We stood there for a long moment, both understanding that this wasn't reconciliation, it was a ceasefire. A beginning, maybe. When I finally drove away, the house disappeared in the rearview mirror like a memory I'd finally stopped living inside. Letters and light. By summer, Seattle bloomed. Mount Rainier glowed pink in the distance during sunsets, and weekends meant hiking trails, bookstores, or quiet cafes by the water. Sierra visited in late June. She stepped off the plane in sneakers, no designer heels, carrying a simple tote instead of her usual designer bag. "You look happy," I said. She grinned. "You too. Guess it runs in the family now." "What of you, Ness? What of you, Ness?" And making with the common pretense. We spent 3 days exploring the city, Pike Place, the aquarium, the Space Needle. We laughed more than I expected. Cried once when we walked past a wedding photographer and she whispered, "I canceled mine." She didn't explain. I didn't ask. Some things don't need words. Before leaving, she handed me an envelope. "For you. Don't open it until I'm gone." That night, I sat on my balcony, the sound of rain tapping the railing, and opened the letter. Asterisk. "Thank you for standing up to them. You didn't just save yourself, you saved me too. I'm learning how to earn, how to choose, how to live without depending on anyone. And when I get scared, I remember how calm you were that night at dinner, how you spoke with truth, not anger. You changed more than the balance sheet. You changed the story. I love you. Sierra." Asterisk. Tears blurred the ink. For the first time, they weren't from pain, they were from pride. That autumn, I got promoted again. My manager said I had executive presence. I laughed when she said it. Executive presence. The same woman who'd once been told she wasn't ambitious enough was now mentoring junior developers, speaking at conferences, and leading meetings where people actually listened. When the paycheck hit my account that month, I opened my budgeting spreadsheet, the same one I'd once used to track every painful transfer to my parents, and created a new tab. Tab name: Future Fund. I smiled, because for the first time, every dollar in that column was mine. The rain returned in late October. Seattle rain isn't violent like Texas storms, it's softer. A quiet presence that lingers all day, whispering against the glass. It made the city glow, reflections in puddles, halos around the streetlights. I'd begun to love it, that constant gray. It matched the calm I'd learned to live in. Then, one Thursday morning, I got a voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom again. We're settled into the condo now. Nothing fancy, but it's cozy. Your dad and I were wondering. Maybe we could visit you this winter? Just a weekend. No expectations. Just family." Her voice cracked on the word family. I replayed the message twice, my thumb hovering over delete, then stop, then delete again. I didn't delete it. That night, I video called Sierra. She was sitting on the couch in sweats, her hair messy, a candle flickering behind her. "They called me too," she said. "They really want to come up." "I'm not ready," I admitted. She nodded. "I get that. They're different, Amanda. Not perfect, but humbled." "Do you think they're sorry?" "The set for a nude." Sierra hesitated. "They're learning what it feels like to live without someone cushioning their mistakes. That's a kind of apology too." I looked down at my coffee, silent for a long moment. "I'm not sure I want to open that door again." "Then don't," she said softly. "But don't lock it forever, either." Weeks passed, work consumed me, deadlines, client pitches, a growing team that looked to me for guidance. My days were full, productive, even joyful, but sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at the framed photo of me and Sierra from our trip, both of us laughing under the drizzle. It was the first photo of us that didn't include Mom and Dad, and yet, for the first time, it felt like family. By December, the invitation became more specific. Sierra texted me. "Mom says they're driving up for Christmas. She doesn't expect to stay with you. Just dinner. One night." She said, "I want to see who my daughter became." That line lingered all day. Who my daughter became. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. The Christmas dinner. Christmas Eve came quietly. No grand plans, just a few colleagues, some mulled wine, and a playlist humming softly through my apartment. I wasn't expecting company. Then, at 6:45 p.m., came the knock. I opened the door to see Sierra, first arms full of wrapped gifts, and behind her, Mom and Dad. Mom looked smaller somehow. Her hair grayer, her eyes softer. Dad's shoulders stooped. But his smile was real. "Merry Christmas," Mom said gently. "Hi," I managed, my heart racing. "Come in." They entered cautiously, like visitors in a museum. Their eyes moved over everything, the books, the potted plants, the framed art, the quiet evidence of a life built without them. "This is lovely," Mom said. "You made it yours?" I nodded. "Yeah, I guess I did." As of preemptive then for mocating for. Dinner was simple. Roasted vegetables, pasta, red wine. The conversation stayed polite at first. Small talk, weather, work. Then Sierra broke the tension. "Mom, tell Amanda what you've been doing." Mom blinked. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom." She smiled awkwardly. "I've been volunteering. Financial literacy workshops at the community center. Teaching young women about budgets, credit, and, well, how not to get taken advantage of." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. She looked directly at me. I thought, maybe if I can help others avoid the mistakes we made, it might mean something. Dad added quietly. "She's good at it too." And to start. The best of his not. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. For the first time, I saw effort. Change. After dinner, Dad asked if he could step onto the balcony. The skyline shimmered with lights reflecting off the sound. He leaned on the railing, hands in his pockets. "I didn't come here to justify what we did," he said. "But I wanted you to know selling the house wasn't punishment, it was perspective. We realized how much we relied on you to make our life comfortable. You deserved more than to carry that." I turned to him, surprised by his honesty. "That means a lot." He nodded. "You remind me of your grandfather," he said softly. "Quiet until you've had enough. Then, unstoppable." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt peaceful. When they left that night, Mom hugged me again. "Thank you for letting us come," she whispered. I nodded. "Thank you for coming differently." She smiled through tears. "We're learning." After the door closed, I stood in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the faint smell of pine and cinnamon. For years, family had meant guilt and weight. Tonight, it meant growth. New year, new balance. January rolled in with steady rain and new beginnings. At work, I finalized my promotion contract, senior software architect. The raise was significant. But what mattered more was the confidence behind it. My team respected me. My boss trusted me. I trusted myself. When the HR rep asked if I wanted to relocate permanently to Seattle, I smiled. I already did the day I said no to everyone else's expectations. In February, I started mentoring young women in tech. Most of them were fresh graduates, smart, hopeful, and terrified of making mistakes. One day, after a workshop, a girl lingered behind. "How did you learn to say no?" she asked. I smiled. "By saying yes too many times," she laughed. "That's real." I handed her my card. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's to know when your peace costs too much. When she walked away, I realized I just repeated the lesson my life had been trying to teach me for years. That evening, I sat on my couch, journal open on my lap, the same leather notebook I'd once used to document every debt, every manipulation, every emotional bruise. Now, its pages were filled with something new: plans, ideas, gratitude lists. I wrote one final entry for that day. Freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you stop asking permission for. I closed the notebook and exhaled. The girl who once held her breath at a dinner table full of judgment was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally understood that boundaries weren't walls. They were doors, and she'd just learned how to walk through them. Spring returned quietly to Seattle, soft drizzle, blooming cherry trees, the air thick with the scent of salt and rain. The world felt different now, though maybe it wasn't the world that had changed. Maybe it was me. I had grown used to mornings that started without dread. To checking my bank account and feeling steady instead of anxious. To sitting with silence and calling it peace, not loneliness. I never thought healing would look like this: ordinary, consistent, uneventful. Just days stacked together where I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. And yet, one Tuesday morning, I got a reminder that healing is never as clean as it looks on paper. The call. It was 8:17 a.m. when my phone buzzed. "Mom." For a moment, I stared at the name on my screen, thumb hovering over accept. It had been 3 months since Christmas dinner. 3 months of polite but distant texts, mostly from Sierra, a few from Dad. I answered. "Hi Mom. Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to ask you something, and I hate to. I really do. Sakes for Nimes. We made sense of the widget." My chest tightened. The old fear stirred. "Is this about money again?" But she took a breath before I could ask. "Not money," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "It's about advice. Your father and I, well, we made some mistakes with our taxes this year. We could use your help organizing them." The air left my lungs in one long exhale. "Advice," I repeated. "Not payments." "No, honey. Just your brain. Not your bank account." I almost laughed, a sound halfway between disbelief and relief. "Sure," I said finally. "I can do that." That weekend, I drove to their new condo for the first time. It was smaller than their old house, modest, quiet, tucked on the edge of the city. When I stepped inside, I noticed the difference immediately. No lavish furniture, no unnecessary decor, just simple, lived-in warmth. Mom looked up from a stack of folders on the kitchen table. "You came." I said I would. She smiled softly. "You always do what you say." We sat together for hours going through receipts and forms. It felt strange at first, the math of their lives laid out between us, but there was no guilt trip, no subtle manipulation, just conversation. At one point, Mom sighed. "You know, for years I thought being a mother meant keeping everyone comfortable. I didn't realize comfort can rot people from the inside if it's not earned." I looked up. "That's a hard lesson." She nodded. "You were the one who taught it." After we finished, she poured coffee for both of us. "I started writing again," she said casually. I blinked. "Writing?" "Just little things. Essays for the community newsletter. I wrote one about you." I almost choked on my coffee. "About me?" She smiled shyly. "Don't worry, I didn't use your name. It was about learning how to love without control." Something in my chest loosened. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single event. Maybe it was a series of small, honest moments like this one. When I left that evening, she hugged me at the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for asking differently," I replied. Sierra's news. 2 weeks later, Sierra FaceTimed me out of the blue. Her hair was pulled back, her face glowing with excitement. "I did it," she said breathlessly. "Did what?" "I got promoted senior marketing director." I grinned. "Sierra, that's amazing." She laughed. "I know. And I paid off the last of my credit card debt last month." Every cent. I can't tell you how good that feels. I can imagine, I said, smiling. Freedom looks good on you. She hesitated, then added quietly, I couldn't have done it without you. Not the money, the example. Her voice wavered. I used to think you were cold when you said no. Now I realize you were just trying to survive. That's what boundaries are, I said. Survival with structure. She wiped her eyes and laughed. Leave it to you to make boundaries sound poetic. After the call, I sat by my window watching the rain trail down the glass. It hit me then. The family that once drained me had started to rebuild itself, not by my hand this time, but by their own effort. And maybe that's what real change looks like. Not people saying sorry, but people choosing to do differently. The letter from Dad. A month later, a white envelope arrived in my mailbox. My father's handwriting neat, all caps, like the engineer he used to be. I sat at the kitchen counter and opened it carefully. Amanda, I'm not good with words, you know that. But I'm better on paper than I am out loud. When you stopped helping us, I thought you were cruel. I see now you were protecting all of us from a sickness we didn't even realize we had. Dependence. Your mother and I are doing better. We budget, we plan, we live smaller but sleep better. We miss you, but we understand that space is love too. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times, tears spilling before I even realized they were there. I folded it carefully and slid it into my journal, the same one that once documented every financial bruise. Now, it held proof of something else. Growth. A speech about strength. That summer, my company nominated me to speak at a regional tech conference. The topic was resilience in career and life. Standing backstage, microphone clipped to my collar, I thought about what to say, about how resilience isn't just about working hard. It's about knowing when to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to bandage themselves. When I stepped onto the stage, the crowd blurred into a warm, expectant hum. I used to think strength meant endurance, I began, holding everyone else's weight without complaint. But sometimes, strength means putting the weight down and saying, this isn't mine to carry anymore. A quiet murmur swept through the room, that sound people make when something hits home. I smiled. Resilience isn't staying the same. It's rebuilding without resentment. When I finished, they stood. A standing ovation. And in that moment, I realized that every painful dollar, every sleepless night, every fight at that mahogany table had led me here to a stage, telling people it's okay to choose themselves. That evening, I called Diane. They gave you a standing ovation. She laughed. Of course they did. You basically lived that speech. I guess I did, I said, smiling. Maybe I should have thanked my family for the material. Ha, just remember to charge them royalties. I laughed until my ribs ached. For the first time in years, my laughter didn't feel like escape. It felt like home. A message of my own. That night, I opened my laptop and began typing. Not code this time, a message. Subject. Thank you. To Mom, Dad, Sierra. I wanted to say thank you. Not for what happened, but for what came after. We all made mistakes. But I see the change now in how we speak, how we ask, how we give. That's what love looks like. I'm proud of us. Amanda. I hit send before I could overthink it. No expectation. No need for reply. Just peace, pressed into words. That night, as I crawled into bed, the rain began again. Soft, steady, familiar. I closed my eyes and smiled. This time, it didn't sound like sadness. It sounded like rhythm. Like balance. Like freedom. By autumn, the leaves around Green Lake had turned amber and gold, their reflections shimmering on the water's surface. I walked the loop trail every weekend now. Headphones in, playlists full of songs that used to make me cry but now made me feel alive. Seattle had become home, not just the city, but the stillness it gave me. I was no longer the woman waiting for permission to breathe. Then one afternoon, as I rounded the bend near the boathouse, my phone buzzed with a text from Sierra. Mom and Dad sold the condo. They're moving closer to me in Portland. Mom said you should come for dinner before they go. No pressure. No pressure. That phrase meant something different now. It wasn't a trap. It was an invitation with an exit. I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed back. Tell them I'll be there. Well, the prancer by the waiter to the great night. The Portland dinner. It was strange driving down I-5 again, tracing the same route I'd once taken to run away. But this time, I wasn't running. I was arriving on my own terms. The dinner was small, just the 4 of us in Sierra's apartment. No extravagance, no forced celebration. Just simple food, candlelight, and the low hum of a jazz playlist in the background. Mom cooked lasagna. Your favorite, she said with a shy smile. When I tasted it, I almost laughed. She'd oversalted it. Years ago, I might have teased her. Now, I just smiled. It's perfect, Mom. Halfway through dinner, Dad raised his glass. To our daughters, he said. For forgiving us before we deserved it. Sierra and I exchanged a glance not uncomfortable, just full of quiet understanding. Mom added softly. To learning what love looks like when it's not measured in money. Our glasses clinked. The sound was small, but it echoed louder than any speech. Later, after dinner, Sierra and I sat on the balcony while our parents washed dishes inside. The city lights of Portland glittered below like scattered gold. You think they'll be okay? I asked. Sierra shrugged. I think they're learning to be. We sat there in silence for a while. Then she nudged me. You know, you never told me what you want next. I smiled. Peace. Maybe a dog. She laughed. Seriously. I don't know, I said. Maybe I'll write something one day. Not code stories. About people like us. People who had to untangle love from obligation. Sierra leaned her head on my shoulder. I'd read that. Letters in reverse. A month after that dinner, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a leather envelope, and a handwritten note from Mom. Amanda, these are copies of the mortgage records, the ones you showed us that night. We don't need to keep them anymore. We thought maybe you'd want them not as a reminder of pain, but of progress. You helped us face ourselves. That was the hardest payment of all. Inside the envelope were the old papers, the evidence I'd once used as armor. I sat at my desk, flipping through them. Receipts, statements. Every dollar I'd once spent trying to earn love that should have been free. Now, they felt weightless. I slid the papers into a drawer marked archive. Not to forget, but to remember differently. The conference offer. In November, my manager called me into her office. Amanda, there's an opportunity coming up, she said. Keynote speaker at our international summit in Berlin next spring. You'd represent the company, but more than that, your story about leadership and ethics. It's powerful. People need to hear it. I blinked. Berlin? She nodded. Flights, hotel, everything covered. Think about it. As I walked back to my desk, I felt that familiar flutter in my chest, not fear this time, but purpose. That night, I called Diane. Berlin? She shouted through the phone. Girl, you're global now. I laughed. It's just one speech. It's not just one speech, she said. It's your story going international. Full circle. The visit. In early December, I drove to Portland again. Mom's birthday. Sierra had planned a small get-together, just close family and a few neighbors. The kitchen was full of laughter and the smell of cinnamon cake. When I walked in, Mom hugged me tighter than usual. You came. She whispered. Of course. After dinner, she pulled me aside. Do you remember when you said you'd take a break from family dinners? I nodded, smiling. I remember. Well, she said, her eyes glistening. Thank you for coming back when you were ready, not when we demanded it. I swallowed hard. Thank you for giving me something worth coming back to. A small gesture. Before leaving, Dad handed me a white envelope. Don't open this until you get home. When I did, I found a check for $10,000 and a note. Not repayment, just a start. For everything you gave that we can't return. Love, Dad. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I smiled and slipped it into the same drawer as the old receipts, proof that accountability doesn't always come as a speech. Sometimes, it's action. Winter solace. That winter, I stayed in Seattle for the holidays. No family dinners, no grand plans, just my apartment, soft jazz, and the hum of city lights. On Christmas Eve, Sierra called from Portland. The background noise of laughter filled her screen. Mom's making lasagna again, she said, grinning. Still salty. I laughed. Wouldn't be Christmas without it. Next year, Sierra said. You'll come down? We'll see. Fair enough. She smiled. Merry Christmas, Amanda. Merry Christmas, Sierra. When the call ended, I sat by the window, sipping tea, watching snowflakes drift through the streetlight glow. For once, the quiet didn't feel like distance. It felt like peace earned, not given. The message that ended the year. Just before midnight, I got a text from Mom. No pressure, no expectations. Just love you. Happy New Year. I typed back. Love you too, Mom. See you when it feels right. Then there another. Thanks for watching The Growed. When the difference. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like balance. The year closed, not with fireworks, but with calm. No grand reconciliations, no dramatic endings. Just people learning slowly, imperfectly how to love without taking. And me, learning that peace doesn't mean absence. It means presence without pain. The flight to Berlin took 11 hours. Clouds stretched like silver fabric beneath the plane, the horizon painted in pink and gold. I sat by the window, headphones on, fingers absently tracing the edge of my journal, the same one that had once held debt calculations and emotional wounds. Now, Its pages were filled with speeches, sketches of cities I'd yet to see, and reflections about growth. A flight attendant passed by with coffee. "You heading to Berlin for business or pleasure?" I smiled. "A little of both." She laughed politely and moved on. But I sat there thinking for years. I'd confused survival with success. Now, I finally understood that real success wasn't about money, titles, or proving myself to anyone. It was about peace, and I had earned every ounce of it. The Berlin keynote. The conference hall was enormous glass walls, banners fluttering in soft winter wind, hundreds of people gathering with notebooks and cameras ready. When they introduced me, I stood behind the podium, heart steady, palms dry. No nerves this time. Just gratitude. "My name is Amanda Reed," I began. "And this isn't a story about tech. It's a story about boundaries." The crowd laughed lightly. I smiled back. I used to think leadership meant saying yes, yes to projects, yes to people, yes to family, yes to everything. Until one day, I realized I was saying no to myself. You can't build systems that thrive when you, the architect, are collapsing. Heads nodded. The room grew quiet. "I once paid $61,000 to keep my family's home afloat," I continued, voice steady, honest. "And in doing so, I learned that love without accountability isn't love, it's control. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're sustainable compassion." A woman in the front row wiped a tear. "I thought walking away would make me heartless," I said softly. "But it made me whole." When I finished, the applause didn't come as a burst. It came as a wave, slow, powerful, continuous. A letter across oceans. That night, back at my hotel, I found a message waiting in my inbox. Subject: "We watched your talk." It was from Sierra. Asterisk: Mom and Dad saw the live stream. They cried. Dad said, "That's our girl." And Mom said, "No, that's her girl. The one who finally became herself. They asked me to tell you they're proud of you, not for the money, not for the speech, but for how you turned pain into purpose." Asterisk. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I typed back, simply, "Tell them I heard them, back home." When I landed in Seattle a week later, the rain was waiting. Of course it was. It was always raining here. But now, it felt like a familiar heartbeat. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. On the counter sat a small package with no return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo. Me and Sierra at the Portland dinner. Mom's lasagna steaming on the table. Dad mid-laugh. On the back, written in Sierra's looping handwriting, "Home is wherever honesty lives." I smiled and set it on the shelf beside my books. Unfinished pages. That weekend, I sat by the window with my laptop open and a blank document waiting. The cursor blinked like a pulse. I began to write, not for an audience this time, but for myself. Once upon a time, a daughter was told she was a failure at dinner. She believed it until she realized she'd been the foundation holding everyone else's house together. When she stopped holding it up, everything crumbled. But from that wreckage, something beautiful grew. Accountability, honesty, and a kind of love that didn't demand self-erasure. I paused, staring at the screen. Then I typed one more line. This story isn't about losing family. It's about finding myself within it. The reunion. 6 months later, I returned to Portland for Sierra's birthday. It wasn't a grand event, just family and a few close friends in her backyard. Laughter mingling with the smell of grilled food and rain on soil. Mom waved from the porch, apron dusted with flour. Dad was showing a neighbor his new woodworking project, a small birdhouse he'd built with reclaimed cedar. Sierra ran up and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it." We spent the evening talking, laughing, reminiscing, not about the pain, but about the progress. At one point, Dad handed me a small wooden box he'd made himself. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a tiny silver key. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the key to the old house," he said. "We kept one. Thought you should have it." I looked at it for a long time. "Why me?" "Because," he said quietly, "you were the one who kept it standing." Tears filled my eyes. I slipped the key into my palm, its cool weight grounding me. "Thank you," I whispered. A full circle moment. That night, as the sky darkened, Sierra lit candles around the yard. The four of us sat outside beneath the soft string lights, the air heavy with summer rain. Mom turned to me. "Do you ever regret walking away?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said. "If I hadn't, none of us would have learned how to walk back differently." She nodded slowly, her eyes shining. "You were always the brave one." I smiled faintly. "No. Just tired enough to change." The ready and the go to bow time. The great so mater. Within Bideau proper, we laughed, not the brittle laughter of people pretending things were fine, but the kind that comes when truth finally has room to breathe. The epilogue. Months later, as I packed for another conference this time in London, I opened my desk drawer and saw it again. The old binder. The letters. The check from Dad. The photo from Sierra. I didn't feel anger anymore. Only gratitude for the lessons, for the boundaries, for the woman I had become. I closed the drawer and whispered to myself, "We made it." Then I turned off the light and stepped out into the rain, the same rain that had once felt like grief but now felt like grace. Final note. Sometimes the people who call you a failure are simply afraid of what your freedom reveals about their own cages. Sometimes, the house that falls apart was never meant to stand on your shoulders in the first place. And sometimes, walking away isn't the end of love, it's the beginning of it. Because the moment you stop paying for someone else's peace, you finally earn your own.